The United States says it is willing to see Ivory Coast through its electoral process ahead of polls slated for 2025. This follows a meeting between the United States delegation or U.S. delegation and officials of the Independent Electoral Commission on Tuesday, August 20, 2024. The meeting between the president of the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC, Ibrahim Coulibaly Quebet, and the U.S. delegation headed by Ambassador Jessica Davis-Barr and the Senator John had on the menu helping in raising awareness amongst the youth and training of actors in the electoral process, amongst others. What implications does this of such help have in terms of Ivorian-U.S. relations, and what are the stakes involved? Join us as we unfold these in the course of today's edition of the program. Stay with us. Hello Africa and the world, thank you for trusting your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. And this day on this edition of Talking Points, we focus on these latest developments in the West African nation of Ivory Coast, where of course the U.S. delegation in the course of a meeting that took place on Tuesday highlighted it is willing to support the Ivorian Electoral Commission, the IEC, in facilitating the process or electoral process of upcoming elections built for 2025. To discuss this topic of discussion this day, I'm being joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD, a Pan-Africanist, and an economist joining us all the way from the U.S. Thank you immensely, sir, for taking our time to be with us on today's edition.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and thank our viewers for tuning in also, and those who will do so subsequently. I hope and pray, like always, we have a very fruitful conversation today.
Absolutely. We all look forward to fruitful conversations that will play a role as far as changing the narrative across the African continent is concerned. Of course, subsequently, we shall be joined by Dr. Eddie Eric, a Programs Officer at the Solidarity Center Africa Department. Now, to debut today's conversation, Dr. Stanley. Now, you've listened to the preamble, of course, that pertains to these latest developments that unfolded in Ivory Coast. Now, U.S. says it's willing to support the Ivorian Electoral Commission to facilitate or prepare or better prepare the upcoming elections. Now, what analysis could you make out of this?
I think that the African needs to be extremely careful when anyone from the West comes knocking at their door to help without being invited. The African needs to be extremely careful in that regard. And the reason for that is because we have this pattern on the African continent where we have been manipulated by the West throughout many avenues, be it on the issues of the fact that we are doing so because we are trying to be able to let the world know that we are quite open, we have free and fair elections, but not knowing that that is the back door for them to meddle, not just in our elections, but in the political processes that we have on the continent. The time has passed for the United States or any other European country to show up on the African continent and try to be able to meddle in our elections by trying to put somebody who will be favorable in relationship to the policies that they want to be able to put for us on the continent. And I think that Ivory Coast has a whole lot more issues to deal with so far as the United States of America is concerned, the least of which has anything to do with her elections. I think that her electoral process is strong. I think that those who have the capacity to be able to handle the elections in Ivory Coast, the Ivorians, has what it takes. You know, these are not kindergarteners, these are not babies that needs to be micromanaged just so that they can be able to carry out an election. We have bigger issues that exist between the United States and Ivory Coast. And I think that we need to be able to address that. For starters, why don't we even begin by talking about the fact that the Ivory Coast in itself is the largest producer of cocoa in the world, producing 40% of all the cocoa in the world. What you do not understand is there's a small community in a place called Pennsylvania, just outside of Pennsylvania, outside of Harrisburg in Pennsylvania, rather the capital of Pennsylvania. It's called Hershey. Hershey produces what we call the Hershey chocolate. If you look at the GDP of that small, tiny community, which might be the size of a place like East Legon in Ghana, or a place like maybe Ikeja in Lagos, Nigeria, that is just the size of Hershey. That small particular place called Hershey, her GDP is 40 times more per capita than that of the Ivory Coast. What is happening in Hershey? Hershey is a chocolate producing place. It's a place where they manufacture chocolate, all right? They produce chocolate. So they import all of this cocoa from places like Ivory Coast and around the world, and it comes there, they convert them into finished products, and they give us all our chocolate, pastries, everything that pertains onto it, and then, they export that throughout the world. But they, in Hershey, Pennsylvania, negotiate exactly how much a country like Ivory Coast will have to sell that chocolate. These are some of the areas in which, if the United States is really interested in being able to talk about or help the situation that is taking place on the African continent or in Ivory Coast for that matter, we need to start talking in concrete terms rather than these, phantom colonial postures, which has nothing to do with the livelihood of the Ivorian, but everything to do with control and manipulation.
Absolutely. Getting your analysis, it shows there might be other motives behind this will or zeal to help the Ivorian Electoral Commission. And now, still in that light, in what ways? Because you cited the economic aspect, which we shall be coming back to in a bit, to come to understand the economic implications of such help. But then the United States says it wants to help. In what ways should we be seeing this help? Is it in terms of elections financing, or there is more to it aside from the economic aspect?
Well, if there's any way in which the United States can help when it comes to the elections in Ivory Coast for 2025, then let them stay away. I think that if we start talking about, accepting help in any form, so far as our elections are concerned, then we have given the doorway for the West to decide who our presidents will be. And if this happened in Ivory Coast, it will happen everywhere else. And I think in retrospect, when we talk about the U.S. meddling in elections on the African continent, it is not a futuristic, projection. It is not us looking at the balance sheet and basically, looking backwards as to what has happened. I think that is exactly what we can be able to do at this particular point, because there are no financial projections. We are looking backwards as to what has happened. That's a balance sheet, for whatever the fiscal year would have been. We can be able to tell, we can look on the African continent and we can see over 4 decades what the U.S. policy has been on the African continent, the areas that the U.S. has basically meddled in, the presidents that has been taken out, when I mean taken out, that has been assassinated, by the blessings of, blessings like, out of Washington, and you look at places like London and Paris, that has given the blessings. We can look at that, and then we can come to the general consensus that this is a very bad idea, allowing any country from the West, not just the United States of America, to show up on our continent, show up on our doorsteps, onshore in Africa, to tell us exactly why we should do elections in a certain way without allowing us to be able to pull ourselves by our own bootstrap. We are men, not children. We are men, not infants. And I think that, what the U.S. should do is stay away from the continent when it comes to our elections, and allow the African to be able to do what the African would do best to the African interest. And if that was going to be the case, we will elect people into power without, all these constraints that come with, because whoever we elect into power, the person most likely is working for us on the African continent and is also working for foreign investors, people who will be coming in, and those guys are all controlled, manipulated, by the countries to which they're coming in. And obviously, those countries now have to decide who we have to put in power that will create the favorable environments that they need, for their investors to operate on in the continent. And that does not work well with the common man, because the person who loses in the end, are the citizens of these individual nations. We cannot receive any form of help. It does not matter, especially when it has to do with the issues of our elections. If you're asking me if we need any kind of aid, if you're asking me if there can be any kind of structures that are given so far as elections are concerned, missionaries, to have some kind of an electronic voting system, absolutely not. Let us go to the ballot the old-fashioned way. Let us elect some folks that will have the vision for the continent, not the vision for the West.
Absolutely. It's all about the vision and growth and development, or say the prosperity of the African continent. Earlier on, you mentioned the aspect of elections meddling in Africa. And of course, this is something which we've been evoking in the course of different programs. All the same, how does this raise the question of, you cited that as an outcome of election financing coming from outside actors or collaborators, this would definitely lead to an impact on the, say, outcome of who gets to be in power. Does this issue of election meddling actually poses a threat to the true line of what true democracy in Africa is supposed to look like?
The reason why we have not had any kind of true democracy on the continent of Africa is because we have continued the post-colonial era systems where the colonial masters never truly left. They just took over some key institutions, that of the mining sector, our electoral, processes, and they just basically colonized those areas, and we had the illusions of freedom, and we never had freedom after all. The West has continually for over, the years, decades now, they have decided in many ways who our presidents would be. They have kept men in power long beyond their age, long beyond their years, and we have literally watched on the sideline, and we have become, we have had this front seat view, to history as to what it is that, the West can do on the African continent. Yes, of course. This is not something that is, is futuristic. These are things that we have dealt with already on the African continent. We know the story. We know the outcome. We have watched this movie before. This is not something that is strange to us. This is the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth times, that we are watching this movie. And, what else do you expect us to do? We have learned the lessons we needed to learn, but unfortunately, there's always a brother willing to sell, another. There's always a Negro willing to sell a brother for $1. So obviously, we'll have some folks on the continent, who are so much interested in making a buck, and they will throw the whole entire continent, under the bus. And I think time has come for us to be able to make sure that long before we even start thinking about who we are going to vote for in the box, in the ballot box, it's important for us to start thinking, who is it that is speaking truth to power? And the only truth to power that is quite coherent, so far as I'm concerned, on the African continent, is to get an Afrocentric mindset, somebody who basically understands the consciousness of the African, someone who understands exactly how diabolic the West can be, who understands precisely with a lot of precision what are the economic principles that we can be able to enhance on the continent of Africa to make sure that we get what we need, to build up the middle class, build up our communities, get road infrastructure, be able to link up the continent one way or the other so goods and services can spread across the continent. Those are the kind of things that we need. The idea that we have to sit on the sidelines and just watch this, and comment about it, as they happen without something actually actually happen in real time as we counter, these influences that are coming out from the West. It's something that is beyond my imagination. We need to do whatever it takes to make sure that we stand there to state that these kind of practices will not continue, and we are not going to stand by and allow this to happen. Let the West do what the West do in the West, not on the continent of Africa anymore. I think that the African has become conscious. We are of age, and we are more determined than ever to bring prosperity on the African continent, not extortion.
Absolutely. While we discuss today's conversation on what's at stake as far as these recent announcements by U.S. delegation to help Ivorians, or precisely the Ivorian Electoral Commission, to facilitate or better prepare for the upcoming elections. Now, we recall that during this meeting, the U.S. delegation set the intent to create awareness amongst the youth, most especially as far as taking part in electoral processes is concerned, while the intent to train the actors that will be taking part in this electoral process. Now, given this recent need to actually get closer to the youth as far as electoral processes is concerned, as a Pan-Africanist, of what importance or how urgent is it for youth across the African continent, not just in Ivory Coast, to take part in governance systems, to take part in electoral processes, and of course decision-making across their respective countries across Africa? So it definitely gets to lead to the right direction as far as leadership is concerned, and definitely in terms of the prosperity of the African continent.
I think that there's something to be said about reading the book. It's commendable. If somebody says, I want to read, I want to be an Advent reader, it's good. It's good. But the problem is, what are you reading?
Absolutely.
All right? It's one thing to say that I need to be educated. What are you being educated in? That is the problem. When you have a country like the United States basically showing up on the African continent and start talking about the fact that they're trying to be able, to get the youth involved so far as our election is concerned, especially when we are dealing and living in the fifth generational warfare system, which is based upon disinformation and misinformation. That is exactly what the fifth generational warfare system is. If you never thought that it has happened on the continent of Africa, look at the Arab Spring. It was all based upon disinformation, fifth generational warfare. That's when we actually came to understand exactly what it was in broad scale perspective on the African continent. The Arab Spring was as a result of this fifth generational warfare. Now, when you get young people and you begin to indoctrinate them with whatever is West, whatever is from the West, you get young people on the continent of Africa, and you begin to instill in them this moral decadence that is happening out here in the West with the LGBT community. You tell them that what is so unnatural about the human body is natural. You get young people and you begin to tell them that it's okay if they decide, young boys, if they decide to start wearing women clothes and moving out in public and making a fool of themselves, as people who are quite demented with the mental with mental issues. If you start instilling in them that's okay, then that kind of training and bringing young people to participate in the electoral process is exactly the reason why we should not be able to allow anybody from anywhere else in the West to show up on the continent of Africa and tell us exactly how we need to get things done. The young African understands what they need to do. They have full-fledged understanding as to what it is that they have to be able to carry out so far as building a robust democracy on the continent of Africa is concerned. We are a people with cultures, values, and we respect our cultures, we respect our values. We are a people who absolutely are enshrined for thousands of years, in a particular way of our own belief systems, and it is counterproductive for any other person to show up on the continent of Africa and behave as if to say our cultures are inferior. Our cultures are not inferior. Our cultures are absolutely not inferior to any other person's culture. No one's culture is inferior to another. If the West has decided to basically disintegrate herself in the way she's doing, just like the Roman Empire imploded from the inside, then that is not Africa's issue. On the African continent, we need to have a robust pushback on any form, of indoctrination that will be coming out from the West. I say this again, there is nothing to teach the African about anything. We will be able to learn what we need to learn because we have already understood exactly how the West operates. We have seen it time and time again. This kind of education is nothing else, in my opinion, but just a fifth generation warfare.
Absolutely, it's all about an intellectual warfare. But then, in the bid to move away from that, I think the IEC is actually going to contradict that, because this was a decision or an announcement that was well welcomed by the president of the Independent Electoral Commission, citing that it was going to facilitate their mission as far as preparing the upcoming elections is concerned. But away from that, aside all the appraisal which we've gotten so far, the U.S. diplomat praised the president of the IEC for addressing the issue of electoral processes without finding it being invasive, which was an issue which we evoked earlier on. Now, what does this say about Africa being independent as far as preparing for its own elections is concerned? Does it mean that it's at the level of the electoral commissions, or it is a decision that it requires a global understanding at a regional level for Africa? Because if we're discussing this, is because everything went fruitful. Now, aside from that, when you look at the African context, one that is striving to be independent, could you say that our electoral processes are truly independent?
No, no, they are not, and they have not been. We are still living within, the framework of the colonial structures, and obviously, it's not independent at all. At no level it is that our systems are independent. What we're trying to do here is to push, that narrative away, that maybe we might also be able to do something on the African continent, which I have pushed for, that we might be able to think about changing the structures in which we carry out most of our elections. I believe sincerely that this thing where we have, mostly in most countries, you have two political systems, right? On the African continent, there's always the opposition and those who are in power. Now, when you start looking, and the opposition is always a single party, very few cases you have, multiple parties in other African nations. Those two powerful, political parties will always be two in most countries. Now, the problem is you have one party that comes into power, there are certain gains that are made, and then the other party comes into power and dismantled all the other gains just, to have some kind of a political ploy. And that to me is an issue. We have to find ways in which we say, wait a minute, we are going to basically bring people into power that has the vision for the country, the vision for the continent, so that whatever are the gains that are made, if they are legitimate gains, there has to be an ISA body that says, wait a minute, this was good. We have looked at the numbers. We have seen that our GDP has gone up. We have looked at the numbers. We have seen that the foreign investors that are coming in basically like this. This is good for the market, and this is good for the people. We have a lot of social responsibilities that has come as a result of this. The markets are booming. Young people are getting into the marketplace. We have, a lot of structural development, infrastructural development that is actually taking place as a result of this that we have done. And then you cannot just come in and you cancel contracts. You cannot just come in and just because you do not like the other guy who was, you guys had a very heated, political campaign. You just come in and then erase everything that they've done. That's my point. We cannot do that. The idea is this: even though we are talking about we having free and fair elections on the continent of Africa, I don't care how free, I don't care how fair it is, the West is always somewhere in the middle. And now there's another key player on the continent of Africa, and those guys on the Eastern Bloc, we're talking about Russia and China, who obviously are also looking at the continent. And so we are, as much as we're talking about how we want to stay away from the West meddling in the elections we have on the African continent, we cannot underestimate, the power of Russia and the power of China. But my point is, in the end, it is the local African, the guys in our individual countries on the African continent that do suffer. There has to be a way that we put an end to this vicious circle, which has gone on for, 6 to 7 decades now, and we're still doing the same thing over and over again. There has to be a way in which we get people on the continent of Africa to, first of all, has a Pan-African mindset, to think Afrocentric, not, Eurocentric, to think that what they need to do on the African continent should benefit the African first, not some foreign corporation or not, not some country in the West. Africa first. That's my mindset.
It's all about Africa First. We just got indications that Dr. Adi Eric is with us, Programs Officer, the Solidarity Center Africa Department. Thank you immensely for joining us, sir, to debut with you. Now, you're an Ivorian and you followed this latest update. Now, I was discussing with your co-panelist where he said a lot of key points. As an expert, what would you say? How would you appraise this recent development where the U.S. says it's willing to help Ivory Coast in the preparation of the upcoming elections?
Thank you, Sharon. I think before I answer that question, I did catch, want to apologize first of all for joining the show a little bit late for professional reasons, finishing a late meeting. The second thing I want to say is regarding the question you asked earlier, whether the Electoral Commission is truly independent. A little bit that I want to share and add to what my co-panelist Stanley, brother Stanley FONGOD, brought in here is, as we talk about, an independent Electoral Commission, we all know the context, generally about, how those commissions, emerge in the political processes in African countries. We are looking at the 1990s when political parties, were at the onset of multi-party system, did not trust the state's apparatus. In the case of Cote d'Ivoire, we talk about the Ministry of Interior in organizing election in such a way that, they will be free and fair, because this state apparatus was, of course, were captured by the ruling government at the time. Thus, political parties push for the creation of independent electoral commission to manage the election. The question we need to ask ourselves, 30 years, more than 30 years after that, as we look back, are we satisfied overall with what was achieved by this electoral commission? In the case of Cote d'Ivoire, we'll say no. Is the electoral commission, independent? Let's stay on the word independent in here. As we talk about this independence, the question will be, what are the entities from which this electoral commission should seek independence? Number one is the states. But when you look at the ways in which the electoral commission is, the composition of its electoral commission, when you look at the decree or the executive order that established that even all legal matters, you have representation of the government in the electoral commission. The question mark here is, how does that become, an independent, commission if you have the representative of the president, the representative of the head of state, the representative of such and such ministry in that entity? First question. Second question. The independent electoral commission should also be independent from the political actors. Who are they? The political parties. In the case of Cote d'Ivoire, and like in many other countries, the political parties that are vying for power, whether it is a legislative power, presidential power, municipal power, or regional powers, have the representative within the electoral commission. It has not worked since 2000. The first electoral commission in Cote d'Ivoire was established in 2000. That's 2000 that witnessed the arrival power of the main opposition leader at the time, President Laurent Gbagbo. So the point here is, again, that you have other entities in how the electoral commission is composed that does not, actually guarantee their independence. And then finally, you have the impact or the influence of what I would call the external influence. Here we're talking about the international institution or international actors. In the precise case in here, we talk about the decision and the willingness of the United States to accompany the Ivory Coast in the 2025 election. It is not new. It is not new. We remember what happened in 2010 for the elections. At some point in the midst of the stalemate, caused by the rebellion, when the conditions were actually not met to go to this election, you have this pressure from the United Nations, from the United States, from France, from all of these quote-unquote, international community, and then we saw what it led to. Having said all that, how do I see this thing? You know, elections have been very contentious in West Africa, in Africa in general, and particularly in Cote d'Ivoire. Since 1990, with the return to multipartyism, there has not been one presidential election that will truly happen peacefully, or happen that met the standards of a fair, free, open, well-disputed and election. Nothing has ever happened. We have the impression that, you know, the return to multipartyism has been a curse. But throughout all these cycles, from 1990 up to today, or up to next year, 2025, there's always been a support. There's always been, you know, what, the financial support, the moral support, the political support, the diplomatic support, you know, from those entities, whether they are in favor of the incumbent president or not. Okay? So what I'm seeing in here, I will rather see this U.S. support in the sense of how do we conjugate all these efforts to make sure that you do not have, or we do not witness another violent, right, episode of election. In order for those things to happen, it is not the support of the U.S. that will determine that, or that will prevent that. It is not the support of the U.S. that will also cause that. It is what the political actors in Cote d'Ivoire themselves are willing to do, starting with the ruling government now. As I said, is the independent commission truly independent from the states apparatus? Is it truly independent from the political parties? Is it truly independent from the political actors, the candidates that are going to compete? Is it truly satisfying? If not, I am nowadays, after 34 years again of establishing electoral commissions in Africa, I am under the impression that, you know, we need to go back to the old system and cancel, ban, I don't know. I have not done, you know, by research on that one, you know, lately, but there is no electoral commission in the United States. And these are known for fact. There is no independent electoral commission, you know, in France. These are known for fact. There are state apparatus in each state or at the federal level that are in charge of running these elections. They can also seek some independence. It's just a matter of things. So, Sharon, this is my impression to answer your question. I think that the United States have a good diplomatic relationship with the Ivory Coast at this time. This support is going to be influential, but again, if we truly want to have an independent electoral commission, this is more the onus, the duty of the local political actors in Cote d'Ivoire more than the external and the international partners that come in.
Okay, Dr. Eddy, I'm glad you evoked the issue of the, what the happenings of 2011 with regards to post-elections violence under Laurent Gbagbo following the defeat of Laurent Gbagbo then. Now, I'll stay with you, Dr. Eddy. You evoked several powerful points which is in line with what's happening as far as this topic is concerned. Now, let's recall, you mentioned that the U.S. stands to be one that is let's say democratic model as far as democracy is concerned. It upholds democracy, but does has good diplomatic relations with Ivory Coast. Now, in that line, when we see the post-elections violence that was seen in 2011, when the former president Laurent Gbagbo then refused to concede defeat, and with these recent announcements or suggestion by the United States to come in and facilitate the preparation of the upcoming elections, could we say it's in a bid to try to prevent the happenings of what we saw in 2011?
The United States, if we read, and then here I'm not, we're playing the advocates for the White House, where they have people who are better positioned to do this. I'm just reading what the U.S. strategy, for instance, to prevent, what global political violence is. When you read this document, which is the White House, strategy for sub-Saharan Africa, there is a chapter on preventing, war conflicts. Right? And it is in line with this prevention of conflict that you have. Also, the prevention of conflict that are related to election. Understanding that, electoral violence can also lead to greater violence and create, the atmosphere, the ambience that allow further, greater, deeper, or more extremism, to happen. This is one of the factors. So when you look at that in here, from that angle, you will see very definitely yes. The other thing that, we also wanted to be very aware of, again, is I did talk about, the good diplomatic relationship between the Ivory Coast and the United States. In order for us to measure that, we just have to look at the number of partnerships that were signed lately between the Ivory Coast and Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, right? There has not been any suspension. You have the MCC, Millennium, Challenge cooperation that was signed with Cote d'Ivoire. You have the question of child labor in the cocoa plantation. All of those initiatives, with Cote d'Ivoire that demonstrate, again, as I said, the goods currently strengthening a relationship between Cote d'Ivoire. However, so as somebody from the Ivory Coast, and also having witnessed what happened, seen what happened, in the, in 2010, with this election that led to the electoral violence in the country, probably and possibly descending into shambles. The support does not always guarantee the fluidity, the fairness, and the
transparency?
Yeah, the fairness and the transparency, exactly, transparency of the electoral process. It does not always support that. This is the reason why you have political actors that are always suspicious, right, of this kind of support. Of course, when people look back at what happened in 2010, we all remember the stern declaration of President Obama at the time, the 5-minute video that he released from the White House, summoning, admonishing, if you want, President Laurent Gbagbo to relinquish power, or there will be violence. People still remember that. Yeah. But this is also more than the financial support, more than a diplomatic support, more than financial support, it is also a clear support in favor of one candidate of another. When today the United States come back again, regardless of the good intention that may be behind that, legitimately there will be suspicion from some other political actors. And this suspicion, again, is leading us in the path of understanding or determining whether
especially as Laurent Gbagbo has been showing intentions.
Is going to be. Is that again?
I said especially as Laurent Gbagbo has been showing intentions as far as the upcoming elections is concerned.
Exactly. So you have this kind, but I agree with you, but I want to put the main actors, right, the candidates or the non-candidate political, Laurent Gbagbo, Mr. Alassane Ouattara on the side, and Tidiane Thiam, put them on the side and look at the population, the voters themselves, right? The other actors that are important in here because they are the one, whenever there is electoral violence, that suffer. We're talking about people in rural areas. We're talking about the people in the cities, in the towns. And I think that, my panelists also mentioned something which is very important in here. It is in terms of the influence of other major actors such as China and Russia as well. We are not analyzing this for now, maybe because they are visibly not seeing anything when it comes to these electoral processes. But let us not forget one thing: we cannot detach the elections from the economic dealings or the political dealings in India. All of those things, can actually intersect with one another and determine the ways in which the Ivory Coast or other countries, are actually organizing the election or designating who should be their rulers for the next years to come.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Ivory, for that brilliant contribution. Now, back to you, Dr. FONGOD. You listened to your co-panelists, and he said there existing relations between the United States and Ivory Coast, and he actually pinpointed a question mark on why the United States is coming back ahead of these upcoming elections. In a bit to comprehend, you're equally a tech expert from a technological point of view. What will you say could be some of the implications?
I have no idea exactly, what technology we can be able to employ at this moment that will make any meaningful contributions, so far as either the elections are concerned or so far as the livelihood of the average Ivorian. And I cut using Ivory Coast just as a pinpoint, for the entire broad spectrum of the West African belt. I don't think that there's a lot that can be done apart from the fact that we will be thinking about maybe having a few more satellites, just like the one that Tesla has with Starlink, that we can be able to help those in rural areas have, be connected to the internet and, for educational purposes mainly, and also for those who are willing to be able to participate in the job market remotely, from those parts of the world, which is basically happening everywhere around the world today. Apart from that, I also will be a little bit cautious about, coming up with any kind of systems that has built anywhere else in the world to come and basically place that on the continent, so that those systems can be used for our own elections. I think that there are issues, and, Dr. Eddie said some things that were remarkable. First of all, when we looked at, the fact that the electoral board or the electoral commissions are absolutely, not free because they have to be independent. They are not independent. I've always been on the push that we need to be able to have a bloc like the West African bloc, the ECOWAS. We need to also be able to get some kind of concessions from people like the African Union rather, that will be able to basically create something that is totally independent from all stakeholders within any elections in any country, that should be able to come in and run this, having no stake in the game. Because once you, I don't know how. The question is, how will you be able to have an independent electoral commission in any country in the first place? That is total. I don't see how that works, because anyone you pick can be influenced one way or the other. They have to be people from outside. And since I think that, our political systems, especially with this multi-party system, is still at its infancy, we really have to be able to find ways in which we do so without necessarily, using the key players from within the country, but basically maybe importing them from some groups like ECOWAS or some groups like the African Union into our individual nations wherever this elections needs to be held, not just in the case of Ivory Coast. But to answer your question again, if this has to be that we are waiting for some kind of technology to be able to show up in terms of the elections, I think that is fruitless so far as I'm concerned. Let's use technology in agriculture. Let's use technology in the tech space. Let's try to be able to open up this information superhighway. Let's be able to get people in the inner cities, and let's get people in the rural areas connected, on this common platform where they can learn, study, and basically pick up new skills so that they can become profitable and marketable in the 21st century tech space. So for me, I think that's the area that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Dr. FONGOD. Coming back to you as far as economic implications is concerned, back to you, Dr. Eddie. Now, given you are the Solidarity Center, the programs officer, now in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the implications of such decisions on the global world, what would you say could be some of the geopolitical outcomes as far as this suggestion by the U.S. to help Ivory Coast in its upcoming elections is concerned?
Listen, China is preparing its next forum with Africa.
Absolutely.
Right? This is purely at the economic level. Not long ago, around the BRICS, countries such as Russia, and even outside of the BRICS, you have countries such as Turkey that have also if you want, step up their game when it comes to establishing or furthering commercial relationship, trade relations in the world with African countries, right? So all of those international actors, all of those countries are looking for ways. We are in the era in which we also talk about the importance of critical minerals, right? And the African continent remains, that potential source of this mineral, important mineral. I have given this rounded, perspective, at the geopolitical level, to say that what we are seeing the United States doing today contributes to what we call, soft power, right? It is not unusual for countries to further their relationship with other partners using different avenues. And if you read the strategy from either China, the United States, Russia, and all of those actors, each of them know how they proceed or they want to proceed. The question for us has always been, what is this that, what the African countries themselves determine to be the right course of action for them in terms of a benefit for them and for their populations. That's where the main questions, what remains in there for them. But at the economic level, with these elections, number one, it is critical today in West Africa that stability and peace remains. The continent is today, Africa is talking about the free continental trade area. This will become effective, productive, performing very good in a context or in a violence-free continent. And therefore, all of the avenues, all of the factors, the risk factors of any conflict should be quietened, if you want, or addressed in such a way that, peace is preserved, stability is preserved. This also contributes a lot to the economy. Second thing, Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire is AGOA eligible. Not long ago, the African Group Opportunity Act, was summit that took place in the United States. And with Ivory Coast being such a country, you know that automatically when you have an unconstitutional, change of power or any election that can lead to political violence, the United States will decide that, hey, listen, the criteria of eligibility will not be met with this new violence, whether it is election-related violence. Therefore, the country is struck out. And once the country is struck out, who are the people who suffer the most? It's the artisans, the informal labor sector workers, the traders, and et cetera, et cetera. So there is also, from that angle, an economic perspective that, or an economic gain that actors cannot afford to lose with that. So the United States is also carefully watching that as well. Another thing, Sharon, is the cocoa sector. The Ivory Coast is number one in terms of production, and we also know that a lot of these cocoa beans produced in the Ivory Coast find their way in the international market, also and to New York and other places in the United States. This is also very important. You don't want any conflict to tamper with this supply chain. It is not only that one, right? So in this geopolitical movement, or the movement of flux and influx that we see, and we have seen nowadays with a regain of interest from the countries of the East, with China making more and more inroads in Africa, with Russia poking its head more and more, it is legitimate, I will say, quote unquote, in here, that we see again, a country such as the United States, which has been a long partner, right, with France and the Western European countries, deploying new strategies to assert their presence or to assert their influence, not only globally, but also further their diplomatic, economic, trade relationship with those African countries, especially with Côte d'Ivoire in here. Again, all of those things will lead to some clear economic gains that may also challenge what China is doing, challenge what Russia is trying to do. My last point, answering that question, or all of my last point to all of the questions you asked Sharon, and during this show in here, will be again to determine what is this, throughout all of those things, that Africa itself is gaining. Should we continue to have electoral processes that are mad with violence? The answer is no. The population don't want that. Should we continue to have elections that end up with a stalemate? The stalemate leads to violence, with people fleeing the countries, with people going into exile, when we know that the designation of the rulers of the countries should actually be sometimes divisive, but actually in the end should be a way to bring the country together, to assert their identity, number one, and of course, you know what, to look for prosperity. Because at the end of the day, what is it that people are looking for political power for? The political power is nothing but, you know, to sit where whoever has that power vested in him or in her by the people have the possibility now to determine who gets what in the natural resources that you know you have in the country, or who gets what in all of the resources that you have for the sake of what? Prosperity for men and women, those who are workers to have decent jobs, to have decent salaries, and for people to have access to hospital, to have access to water, have access to education. This is the purpose. And I will end it in there, Sharon.
Okay, Dr. Reddy, of course, I'll be coming back to you for us to proceed in that line of action. Now, with you, Dr. FONGOD, now we are in a new world order. You listen to your co-panelists. We are in a new world order, and of course, bilateral cooperation is one of the tools for development as far as this new world order is concerned. But then, as a Pan-Africanist, or better still, as an economist, do you think that this recent suggestion by the U.S. to support Ivory Coast, it's more a testament of the U.S. asserting to the New World Order rules?
Well, I think that, you know, there's something to be said that there's no country that's going to be left independent truly in terms of economic terms anymore so far as the world is concerned. My problem is that we need to be able to find some kind of an equitable way in which everyone who participates in the marketplace, you know, do so with a certain level of fairness. You know, there's this common expression that he that comes with equity comes with clean hands. We need to be able to make sure that that is the case so far as, you know, our contract agreements with whether it's the Eastern Bloc or the West is concerned. There has to be that level of fairness. I think Dr. Eddy said it quite well. You know, the African has to basically decide what she wants so far as, you know, these contracts are concerned, what she wants so far as these agreements are concerned. To say the least, Ivory Coast, you know, leading producer, 40%. You know, if you were going to factor in Ghana, it is 60% of the world, you know, leading cocoa producers. 60% of all cocoa produced in the world come from two countries. That's Ivory Coast, that's Ghana. And if you look at what is happening, and, you know, in the talk about child labor, which is an increase, which is based upon nothing else but poverty. Poverty will basically make families to be able to send children out to go and work in cocoa fields, you know, so that they can be able to, you know, meet up with basic needs. Or limited access to education, as we have limited academic structures, very few children have the capacity, you know, to be able to go to school, and the unwillingness in these nations to be able to make sure that, you know, we enforce laws that will basically state that young children should not participate in this kind of labor is not there. But the underlying, you know, cause of this, so far as I'm concerned, we have to still look back at the West. Why will a particular place like Hershey, Pennsylvania, whose GDP is 30 to 40 times higher than that of the Ivory Coast per capita, why will that particular environment be this, you know, be the key environment, the key community, little tiny town, okay, that will basically be able to determine how much cocoa is being sold in the market with another company like Nestle? We have to be able to find ways in which, you know, while these countries are talking about, you know, bringing infrastructure, why they're talking about basically bringing in technology, why they're talking about, you know, signing contracts that are meaningful so that we can boost up the economy and basically raise the GDP, you know, basically boost our standard of living, pull up the middle class. I understand that. but we also need to understand that there has to be some stakeholder responsibility. We need to be able to do this in a more humane way, where we don't have children working, in cocoa farms in Ivory Coast and in Ghana, while those in Hershey, Pennsylvania are busy learning in classes. That is totally unacceptable. And in all our talk about, being superpower and being great, that is counterproductive, to what is it that we're trying to project so far as the world is concerned. I think the African still has the capacity to solve this from an Afrocentric perspective. Let us have groups on the continent of Africa that can be able to look at this think tank on the continent, that can look at this and then find out and bring out, the solutions that would work for the African, that the African should be able to become responsible and to those in power. A day comes when you leave power. Posterity is something else that you can run away from. So we need to be able to leave legacies that are meaningful.
Exactly, Dr. FONGOD. Now, Dr. Reddy, do you share the same opinion as far as your co-panelist's point of view is concerned, citing that bilateral cooperation is the tool for development, and of course, citing that Africans should look at their problems and resolve their issues from an Afrocentric perspective?
I cannot disagree with him, and I'm glad that he mentioned the Afrocentric perspective, which is one of the school of thoughts from which I come from and where I was trained at Temple University. That does not mean, the second point where I agree with Dr. FONGOD, is that that does not mean that a country should live in a complete autarky and not seek a bilateral relationship with any other. This is sometimes where we can disagree as Pan-Africanists as well with other Pan-Africanists, giving the impression that we don't look at the current realities. Because as we talk about bilateral relationship, even way back to in history.
Sorry to cut you short, Africa. Dr. Reddy. Unfortunately, we're unable to get you properly. The volume is down at this end. Apparently, you lifted your mic up on your headset. Just try to regulate that and you proceed. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Is that better now?
Yeah,
thank
perfect.
you. The mic was up. And I'm very sorry. I was saying earlier that I cannot disagree with what Dr. FONGOD said, meaning that I do agree with him 100%, as he talked about what the Afrocentric perspective, a school of thought from which I do come from myself, and second, from the fact that he clearly mentioned that there is no way that in the world we live in today we can close our eyes on the importance of bilateral relationship, whether those bilateral relationships can be with any superpower or with those countries that were back in the days were considered to be the non-aligned countries. In any case, relationships have always been. When you look at the proximity of the countries that we have in Africa today, whether we like it or not, between the Ivory Coast and Guinea, the Ivory Coast and Mali, Burkina Faso and Ghana, you always have traders, even at the informal level, that are crossing every single day the borders from one country to another to trade, okay? Or even to have, to perpetuate, a family relationship because of the borders that we have. Those things are very important. So, having said that, I will also add this, that the world that we live in today, where the African continent, was stained today, there is no other, or there is, there may be, but there is no other better alternative than to have this bilateral, multilateral, relationship for the sake of development. However, I also agree with those who are skeptical of those. They are right because after more than 60 years of independence for most of the African countries, Those bilateral relationships, those multilateral relationships with the former or the Western European countries or the former colonial powers have not yielded to any subsequent development for the prosperity, for the betterment, for the happiness of our people. Dr. FONGOD mentioned that, you have cocoa, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the two of them, remain the leading producers of cocoa in the world today. 60% of the cocoa beans produced every year come from these two countries. But what is the fate of the cocoa producers themselves? What is the fate of the agricultural workers in those cocoa farms? Are they truly benefited from the hundreds of billions of dollars that what the cocoa economy is generating every year? The answer to that question is no. Almost 600,000 cocoa farmers in Cote d'Ivoire just share less than $10 billion of the cocoa revenues that come to the Ivory Coast, knowing that cocoa by itself generates more than 20% of the Ivory Coast GDP, for instance. This is where, where the questions that should be for us. That's the reason why when those elections, do come, for instance, what the people should be empowered to seek is whoever is that leader that is seeking election, who is going to be elected and who is going to revert or contribute to reversing the course so that whatever is being produced at, fairly, is also fairly paid. Recently, there has been a lot of contention because of the price paid to the cocoa farmers. For instance, the government in Cote d'Ivoire, after many negotiations or reflection, decided to increase the price to 1,500 francs CFA, which is about $3 or maybe 2 point something dollars per kilogram of cocoa. It can be an increase, but still, with the current inflation in the country, with the current inflation, the double-digit inflation in West Africa, this increase represents basically nothing. This is what the cocoa farmers are complaining about. So when you have this support coming from their partners, from the United States, I believe that, the language or the discourse should also be about improving and truly improving the welfare of the people in the country, but not just for the sake of having elections. Why are we having elections? We're having elections to make sure that, where prosperity is ensured for everybody. We have election to make sure that, whoever is elected, as I said earlier, has access to the resources to make sure that, people have education. People have a good education, people have a good transportation system and all that. This is the reasons why we are going to election. Who is the best person to deliver this public service for the people? And I believe that we're beyond money, therefore, beyond the financial resources that are being put in there, beyond the diplomatic support. This is what the language should clearly be from the international institution. May it be the African Union, maybe the ECOWAS, all of them do have protocols, right, for the betterment, for social protection, and they should not be, it should not be separated from the electoral process that we are going through. If I was in a position to advise anybody who is willing to support the Ivory Coast in this upcoming election, making sure that there is no violence that's engulf the whole process, this is where I will insist. This is where I will put the emphasis, more than just providing money, which sometimes we don't even know how it is managed.
Absolutely. Still in that light, Dr. Reddy. Now, in terms of partnerships, you mentioned that we have partnerships existing that are flourishing between the United States and Ivory Coast, and that goes with other countries that might be seeking partnerships with the West African country. Now, in that regard, could we say, how can Africans, not just Ivory Coast, maximize some of these partnerships so it gets to equally benefit the masses? Because here you're citing the issues of the plight of cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast, which is something that resonates with other masses across different African countries. So how do Africans do ensure that when these partnerships are coming in, it's for the benefit first of the African person and the masses after all?
Let me put it this way very simply. Civic engagement is a key. This is one of the problems that we have with electoral commission, especially in Cote d'Ivoire. Today, when you look at the list of voters, the numbers has not reached the 13 million estimated potential voters that we have. Some of the political actors in Cote d'Ivoire have claimed that enrolling new voters and cleaning the voters list, of course, expurging those who have been put in there fraudulently or those who have died, for instance, right, is a process that should take place from the end of one election till the next election or the next electoral cycle should start. Meaning, the election commission has been established as an independent organ functioning with a president, with a staff, with a vice president, whatever that what you name. They work in conjunction also with other state agencies like the Ministry of Interior to establish ID cards and all that. Enrolling new voters should not take place, or checking, expurging fraudulent voters from the list should not take place only 3 months before the elections. This is again the door open to any kind of fraud, which again lead to violence. So number one thing to do will be that. Second thing, I believe, in terms of civic engagements, when you have a funding that come from an external partner, for whatever reason it is, there should be, I believe, a clear, transparent communication from the state entities, right, to the citizens. Citizens must be aware of that. There was a time, Sharon, when the World Bank, I believe, gave the Ivory Coast a grant or a loan, whichever it is, to help with the identification process, to help people obtain an ID cards, which are called, again, a very dangerous thing. Why is it dangerous? It is dangerous because it is the prerogative of a state to identify its population. It should not be a difficult, tedious thing for citizens to do, to have an ID card. Because this is their identity, this is their identification. With an ID card, you don't just go to vote. With an ID card, you can go to a bank established, or you can, what should I say? There are plenty of things that you can do. Open a bank account, run a business. You need an ID card. In the Ivory Coast, you have people who are still walking around with a certificate in their hand. The said certificate indicates that they have submitted all their paperwork to obtain an ID card, and it is still dragging for them to obtain this physical card that should keep them. So those processes should not be complicated. It contributes to the civic engagement that I'm talking about. Then finally, how to make sure that all those things truly ensure beyond the transparency. If we are looking for those support for the election process to be free and fair, what does a free and fair electoral process means? What does it mean? A free and fair electoral process, there are clear criteria that are established to determine the freedom and the fairness of the electoral process. For instance, how many people who should normally be on the voters list are on the voter list? Who should not be on the voter list that is on the voter list that needs to be expunged? Are the political actors, the candidates, the political parties aware? Do they participate in those different processes? Are they informed? Next, how many people in the rural areas can have an easy access to the enrollment sites? Do we have a mobile site that can go from village to villages instead of having people tracking distance, paying transportation to go to a place to enroll? It kills the interest that they may have and wipes out any effort for them to do so. Because voting in the Ivory Coast, for instance, is not an obligation. Though the citizens are required to do that, but it's not an obligation, meaning that if you do not vote, there is no consequent actions against you. So if that is the case, why would somebody in the rural areas whose cocoa, cassava, cashew, etc., is not well paid, why do you want them to use the meager resources that they have to go to a far and long distance to enroll themselves for an election process? These are the things that the election commission in the Ivory Coast and in any other African countries should be mindful of, to make sure that whatever assistance that they receive from outside, right, transparently, clearly is communicated to the people. People know what it is about, but also those support is well used. At the end of the day, Dr. FONGOD is right, and I'm ending on that one, Sharon. Why should we always rely, even it is partially, why should we rely on the European Union or any other external power, the United States, Russia, or whatever you name them? Why should we rely on them to supply funds, money for elections? In the Congo, to make the ballot box, the European Union and other actors have to give money. Why? I think there should be a better mechanism for us to do that. To make sure that, all of those things run smoothly, transparently, but also for the greater good of the people. Again, this is the end game, the greater good of the people. So Sharon, I've been long on that question, but I wanted to give a very expensive answer. There are so many things to do when it comes to making sure that, our election processes are completely free, they are fair, and then they satisfy, the majority of the people, and they do not lead into further conflicts.
Quite elaborately on that question. Meanwhile, maybe it is time for Africa to get back to the traditional systems of leadership, but all the same, to conclude today's conversation, Dr. Eddie, charting the way forward, what would you suggest for the West African nation and the African continent as far as organizing its electoral processes is concerned?
Number one will be to assess. I think a good panel, university professors are very well indicated. Our public university professors, and I know so many of them in political science departments, sociology departments, are well indicated and have interest to do that. We should empower them to do a thorough analysis of electoral commissions in Africa. In the case of Côte d'Ivoire, we can simply analyze what we achieved, what we did not achieve, and evaluate what is this. That's number one. Number two, I am more and more on the side of those who believe that the institution of electoral commissions in West Africa in general have been a failure. Earlier, there's a question that, where you asked regarding, the use of technology, for instance. Yes, today we can rely on technology. Technology has been a great technology with WhatsApp, the internet of today, which is making more and more inroads in Africa, has been a great tool to engage the population civically. But at the same time, if we take the case of Nigeria, the the 2023 election, for instance, right? The National Election Commission in Nigeria relied heavily on the internet for, of course, the diffusion of the election results. And we saw the technical glitches that happened, which, of course, led to so many suspicions about the election being rigged, and it led to what it led. The chairman of this electoral commission himself, admitted that, there have been some glitches. Where did the glitch come from? Understanding that, the African countries sometimes do not have a full control over this technology. If the United States, for instance, in 2016 talked about how there's been some external influence in the electoral process through the manipulation of the internet, you can imagine what it is for the African countries in there as well. So in saying that, and coming back to your question again, I believe that there's much to do. I'm more and more on the side of people who believe that the election commissions have been a failure, and there is a need to bring the organization of election, the designation of, the processes back to the different ministries within the government. It can be the Ministry of Interior, or depending on whatever it is a name in each of those West African countries. Third thing, Sharon, statistics from the some surveys indicate that younger population in Africa, in general, people are not opposed to democracy. People wanted to have a free and fair elections, wants to have an economic, social, political environment that is free, totally free for them, not partially free, but totally free. And when it comes to democracy, it is more than 50% that wants to live in states that are considered democratic. Even in those countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the countries of the Sahel, right? Regardless of how well, strongly they are pushing back, against the Western powers, that they still want to live in a country, or in countries where their rights are respected, where they have clear, good opportunities to education, to health, and all that. They want to live in a democracy, right? This should be taken into consideration. And this is the reason why, aside from the political parties, aside from the state, aside from the business environment, we need to put a greater emphasis on the civil society organizations. The civil society in West Africa, in Africa in general, has increased in terms of numbers since the 1990s. But there needs to be another increase, a qualitative increase, for them to become real actors in the political sphere as well. There's a whole thing, all the thing about, where civil society organization should not participate in actually suppress the voice of a number of actors. So today we have that. And finally, institutions like Afrique Media, or the show that what we are participating in today, and therefore an individual like you, the press. Years ago, in the year 2000, a former president of Mali, Alpha Oumar Konaré, said something that said this, that there cannot be a good democracy without the press, and a good and free press also need a democracy to thrive. The two of them go hand in hand. The opportunity that the internet is creating today to have those free and independent media, it should be expanded more. This is the reason why individuals like me, you and others should continue to fight the African government, the West African government, the East African government, whichever government it is, fight them to continue to create the space for this independent media to thrive, so that information can be largely shared with the population in multiple language. When people are well informed, they become good political actors, informed political actors, and in the end, the processes will be better. In such a way, during election time, as we talk about the electoral commissions, we can also talk about the candidate and the process itself. Sharon, that we all know that during election time, that's when you see candidates running around with a bag of rices. What is it for? It is to purchase. It is nothing but clientelism. To purchase votes, and after that they do disappear. This also does not guarantee the independence of the electoral process. So all of those things should be taken into consideration. But again, my main thing will be, let us analyze what has been done with Electoral Commission, and university professors that should come up with a good study on that. That can be the departing point to improve the election processes in our countries.
Thank you, Dr. Eddie Eric, for that. Programs Officer at the Solidarity Center Africa Department. It was an honor to have you on the program to share your insight with the African population. Meanwhile, we equally acknowledge or appreciate the presence and contribution of Dr. Stanley of FONGOD, Pan-Africanist and economist, who took our time to be part of us this day on Talking Points of our Pan-African channel. Ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be parting ways as far as today's topic of discussion is concerned, which focus on Ivory Coast, where the United States announced that it was willing to support the country better prepare for its upcoming elections built for 2025. We believe you learned a lot from today's conversation. Meanwhile, we encourage you to stay in company of numerous programs over 4U Media Africa. Bye-bye.